The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 15th Day. It is convenient to inform you, at this point of the history, Doctor, about the reappearance of the Gellams. As I said, the 6th day, apart from their presence, always scarce among the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, had arrived massively to Europe since the 4th century before Christ, accompanying an Scythian population from Asia Minor. Such population received many names, according to the country where it transited or established. Fundamentally they were Celts, but they were known as Gauls, Irish, Scots, Bretons, Welsh, Cornwalls, Galatians, Galician, Lusitanians, etc. Let's see now, with more detail, how was that the Gellams united with the Celts, and what is their real origin. I will explain later the meaning of the tablets of the law that Moses received from Eve, when he sealed his covenant with the chosen people. Now it is appropriate to resume that the tablets of the law contain the secret of the serpent, that's to say, the description of the 22 voices that the Creator God employed to realize his work, and the 10 aspects, or Zephyret, with which he manifested in the world when he executed the creation. Are the 32 mysterious parts of the one. This knowledge gives place to a high science denominated acoustic and numeral Kabbalah, which is expressed only in the first tablets of the law. In the seconds, which were always exoteric, there is nothing else than a moral decalogue, palette reflective of the 10 supreme archetypes, or Zephyret. The first tablets possess then, the secret of the serpent, the secret of the construction of the universe. To preserve this secret from the profane glances, the tablets were kept in the Ark of the Covenant, while an interpretation of the Kabbalah was encrypted by Moses, Joshua, the elders, etc. In the written Pentateuch or Torah, the 22 Hebrew letters, with which were written the encrypted words, keep direct relation with the 22 archetypal sounds that the Creator One pronounced, what gives them an inestimable value as magic instrument. But such letter also possesses an archetypal numeric meaning, in such way that every word is susceptible to be analyzed and interpreted. This is the origin of the Jewish numeric Kabbalah, exclusively dedicated to comprehend the writing of the Torah, which must not be confused with the White Atlantean acoustic Kabbalah, that is referred to the runes of Neptune. But the acoustic Kabbalah was revealed in the tablets of the law, and these were locked in the Ark, where only could be extracted once in a year, for privilege of the priests. Finally, the King Solomon buried the Ark in a deep crypt under the temple, some 1,000 years before Christ, and remained in the same place until the Middle Ages, that is to say, for 21 centuries. I could add, that was the magical manner in which it was buried what avoided the Ark to be discovered before. When Solomon died, the kingdom of Israel was divided in 2 parts. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin, who occupied the south of Palestine, remained under the command of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, and the rest of the country, formed by the other 10 tribes, was aligned behind the authority of Jeroboam. In the year 719 before Christ, the great king Sargon destroyed the kingdom of Israel, and the 10 tribes of Jeroboam were transported to the interior of Assyria to serve in the slavery. The 2 remaining tribes formed the kingdom of Judah, from which descends, in greater or fewer extent, the actual Jews. The 10 lost tribes of Israel didn't disappear from history just as the interested Jewish propaganda pretends to make believe. Due to, it is known about the matter much more than it is said. For example, it is true that existed Hebrew in America before Columbus, and also that great part of the actual population of Afghanistan descend from the primitive members of the chosen people. But what interests now is to say that existed migrations of the Hebrews to the north, who were guided by a powerful caste of Levites. After that they traversed the Caucasus, where they were decimated by Germanic tribes. They reached the steppes of Russia, and clashed there with the Scythian population. The mass of the Hebrew people mixed with the Scythians, but, as they were much inferior in number, they not affected the ethnic identity of them. On the contrary, the Levite caste didn't accept to lose their condition of members of the chosen people, degrading their blood with the Gentiles. Thereby, the Levites remained dedicated to the cult and study of the numeric Kabbalah for many years, reaching notable progress in the field of the natural sorcery and magic. When, centuries later, the Scythians moved to the west, one part of them established in the Carpathians and the shores of the Black Sea, while the other part continued their advance to Central Europe, where they were known as Celts. Accompanying the Celts were the descendants of those Levite priests, called now Galim, for being believed that their provenance was the Phoenician city of Sidon, where they were called Gauls, or Gelans. But from Sidon, the Gelams expanded to Tyre, from where they sailed with the Phoenicians to Tarsus, and made the first incursions that the lords of Tarsus, remember after the fall of Tyre, in the 4th century before Christ, they would establish, as was seen, in Carthage, performing the priesthood of Baal Moloch. Some Gelams, established also in Phrygia, as officiates of the cult of Cybele, of Adonis, and of Attis. Is due to in that time, the Gelams had a terrible power, fruit of centuries consecrated to the study of the Satanism, and the practice of the black magic. In sum, the Celts advanced through Europe, guided by the Gelams. At the time, ID would say that such alliance would never end, being extended to our days. But, how reached the Levites, from the lost tribes to becoming Gelams? In other words, how they obtained that sinister knowledge? The explanation must be searched in the fact that these Levites, something that didn't happen with other Jewish priests, neither then nor later, they were not pleased with the knowledge that could only be extracted from the written Torah. They wanted to enter in the Ekma, or divine wisdom, by a direct contact with the source of the acoustic Kabbalah, which is the signs of the swarthy Atlanteans. Their insistence and perseverance to obtain such purpose, and their character of members of the chosen people, convinced to the demons of the wide fraternity that they were before invaluable collaborators of the cultural pact. And this conviction made them decide to entrust them a very important mission, an enterprise that required their dynamic intervention in history. The fulfillment of the proposed objectives by the demons would redound in benefit of the Levites, due to it would allow them to advance more and more in the knowledge of the acoustic Kabbalah. What type of mission was entrusted to them by the demons? A work that had direct relation with their desires, would be the executors of the cultural pact. They would work to neutralize the megalithic constructions of the White Atlanteans, they would try to recover the Stone of Venus, they would fight unto death against the members of the Pact of Blood, and would collaborate to make that the plan of the wide fraternity, consistent in the establishment of the synarchy of the chosen people, in Europe, could be carried out well. But the Gelams, privately, continued being Levites priests, sons of the chosen people, and now keepers of the divine wisdom, of Eve, the Ekma. For this reason, their fundamental occupation, the main objective of their concerns, would be theological. They would try to unify the cults, demonstrating that, behind the plurality of the cults, existed the singularity of God, that thenceforth they shall comply rigorously with the sacrifice of the cult. Because, no matter what form of cult could be, the sacrifice is one, that is to say, the sacrifice participates from the one. Since the 5th century, the Celts and Gelams are already traveling through Europe, to the west. The Gauls were the ones who joined to Hamilcar and avoided Rome to help Tartessos. Then they would join to Hamilcar in the invasion of Italy. But much before, in the 4th century, they had humiliated Rome, and destroyed the Temple of Apollo, in Delphi. Julius Caesar, in his famous campaign of Gauls, achieved to submit them definitely to the control of Rome in the 59 before Christ. August divided the Transalpine Gaul in 4 provinces: the Narbonensis, the Aquitaine, the Celtic or Lyonnese, and Belgium. The Gelams, who had great power over all those populations, started to withdraw step by step from the Roman provinces. They were even followed by some Celtic contingents. They passed first to Great Britain, or Britain, but the final objective is Ireland, that is, Hibernia. In the first centuries of the Christian age, were not many the Ghelums, who moved loosely for Europe. In the 4th century, when the practice of the pagan cults was punished with a death sentence, didn't seem to be Ghelums in the Roman Christians' regions anymore. In fact, in the time the Gauls and Hiberni were totally Romanized, and, in the regions where paganism was still practiced, the Catholic missionaries overthrown the pagan temples, sometimes centennial trees, and put the Ghelums to flight. Invariably, they depart to Great Britain or Ireland. The arrival of the barbarians, in the 5th century, not gives them a chance to re-establish their power because these populations are Aryan Christians and of Germanic race, traditionally enemy of the Celts, who were also considered barbarii. Thus, in the Visigoth kingdom of Spain, the lords of Tarsus will receive the impression that, finally, they had disappeared from the earth. However, the contrary was about to occur, due to in a very little time the Ghelums would be protagonist of the most spectacular return. Yes, because the Ghelums didn't return to Europe to comply their old role of pagan priests of the god One, to comply with the mission of gathering the cults in the ritual sacrifice. Now were the times. Such mission would be in direct hands of the chosen people, who would offer to the One the sacrifice of all the Gentile or Goy mankind. The White Fraternity had entrusted to the Ghelums, in turn, the performance of a superior function, an occupation that would benefit, as never before, the unification of mankind. For that reason, they not returned this time as pagan priests, but as Christians. And not only as Christians, but as Catholic Romans. And not only as Catholics, but as missionary monks of the Catholic Church. And they would be considered wise constructors of the Church, absurd title which mention would bring ironic laughs to the men of stone. This is a long history that here I only able to resume, and has its principle in the plans of the White Fraternity. The traitor gods, to comply their pacts with the Creator God and the potencies of the matter, they had to make easier control of the world for the chosen people. For it would be necessary to fasten definitively the materialistic way of life founded in the cultural pact, that's to say, would be necessary to fasten the cult in the Roman Germanic societies, formed recently in Europe. And the best form to fasten the cult, just as is deducted of what I exposed the third day, is to formalize it and to impress that form in the masses, to centralize the society around the form of the cult. Where the form of the cult begins, what is the most visible extreme for the masses? Evidently, the cult begins with the temple, the first that appear to the believer. In reality, the most important of the cult is the ritual. But every place where the ritual is practiced is a temple, because the temple is the sacred space where the ritual can be realized. The apparent priority of the temple originates in that, effectively, a temple can exist, in other words, a sacred space, or core, of metaphysical manifestation, without a ritual, but it is impossible to conceive that a ritual can be executed out of a sacred space or temple. The plan of the White Fraternity to fasten the cult started then, by the massive implantation of temples and by the evolution in the form of the temples in concordance with the objectives of the ritual. But such plans aimed to a final objective much more complex, the instauration of a world government, in hands of the chosen people. The White Fraternity would create the adequate cultural conditions to make that a future society could accept the form of the government. In that enterprise would occupy the effort of all the priestly caste of Occident, standing out in first term the mission entrusted to the Ghelums. When the society would be ready for the world government, then would realized, through a Messiah, the reunification of Christianity with the house of Israel, and would be elevated the chosen people to the throne of the world. Such were the plans of the White Fraternity, and of the priests of the cultural pact. The transformation of the society that such plans demanded would be fulfilled, principally by the religious unification and the fixative of the cult that exerts every temple over the masses. But would be more was also required the formation of a financial and military power to give support, on its opportunity, to the constitution of the world government. The official cult of the European societies was Christianity, thus the temples would respond to the rites of the Church. Clearly, it is adverted that the plan of the traitor God requires the effectuation of two conditions. The first is that the masses take consciousness about the necessity of the temple for the efficacy of the ritual, and the second is to dispose, in the moment in which this necessity reaches its major expression, a men capable to satisfy it by the constructions of temples, in great quantities and volumes. The first condition would be accomplished by the constant and permanent missionary preach. The second, with the foundation in Occident, of a secret college of the temple constructors. This college, Dr. Setonal, was entrusted to the Gellams. But this not occurred immediately, because the plan of the wide fraternity had to be fulfilled starting with the first condition, when in the church was to be prepared the place that the Gellams would occupy to develop their constructors' college, in the 6th century. Only then they were convened in Ireland, to realize their amazing continental reappearance. From that opportunity, the Gellams took advantage to return to Europe and is the product of the birth, in the 6th century, of the Occidental monasticism, traditionally attributed to Benedict of Nursia. Really, only the ignorance of the Europeans could sustain such attribution for 1,200 years. However, although since the 17th century, it is known in Occident, the histories of the religions of Asia, with quite precision, even today exist those who stubbornly sustain that humbug, amongst them, the official dogma of the Catholic Church. But, to prove the deceit, it is just necessary to take a flight, travel to the Tibet, and observe there the Buddhist monasteries of the 3 and 2 centuries before Christ, that is to say, 800 years before Saint Benedict, whose inner laws and constructions are analogous to the Benedictines. The prayer and the work were ruled there, just as in the Formula Era et Leva of Saint Benedict. But, the most important, the most clarifier of the comparison, will result undoubtedly to discover that the Tibetan monks were dedicated to the office as copyist, that is, to reproduce and perpetuate ancient documents and books, and to preserve and develop the art of the constructions of temples, just as the Benedictines. And must not be insisted, due to it is well known, that such monasteries constituted centers of religious diffusion, by the action of the missionary and mendicant monks, that they were prepared and sent through all Asia. At the light of the actual knowledge, however, anyone with good faith must admit that the institution of the Oriental monasticism date from the 10th century before Christ, that is to say, is, at least 1,400 years older than the apparition of the Occidental monasticism. To refresh the memory, in regard to this, it is convenient to remember the next. In first place, that the oldest hymns of the Rig Veda and the Upanishads mention the Brahmanical communities, Munis and Vatiyas. In second place, that in the age of Buddha, historic personage of the 7th century, before Christ, already existed the groups that would be formed in Sanghas. But, this is not about if the Benedictines were Buddhist or if they had something in common with the Buddhism priests, as the Benedictines priests obeyed to the white fraternity, in secrecy, real occult force of the monasticism, Oriental and Occidental. The white fraternity, in fact, were the authors of a work entitled Rules of the Masters of Wisdom, of universal diffusion that in Occident was known since the 2nd century, as Relia Magistri Sapientiae, by many Christian sects, and also for Gnostic Jews. Thus, nothing original would be in the Occidental monasticism, which would answer, on the contrary, to the most orthodox dispositions, that the wide fraternity rules on the matter. In the first centuries of the Christian age, when the Roman Empire admitted paganism and maintained contact with the populations of Asia, was perfectly known the existence of the monkish Oriental life. Even some illustrious men, as Apollonius of Tyana, contemporary of Jesus, had traveled to the Tibet, and received instruction in their monasteries. Some Gnostic sects, that reach to comprehend and to oppose the plans of the wide fraternity, have left testimony that it was known, in the main cities of Middle East, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antiochia, Caesarea, Ephesus, etc. But, the institution of the monasteries is not established from one day to another. It is necessary to follow a strict formation process, a method which is known since the age of the Atlantis, and the priests, of the cultural pact, have used universally. The Buddhist priests, previous to formation, of the Kshatriya Siddhartha, created the monasticism Buddhist Tibetan, Chinese, Indian and Japanese. This method determines what must start from a phase of social anarchic mysticism, characterized by the proliferation of illuminated, hermits, and saints. This stage has as objective to promote the belief that the future monkish institution is spontaneous product of the people. In this form the populations would accept naturally the existence and the work of the monasteries, and, the most important, will be also accepted by the kings and governors. And this infallible method is applicable in any population, and with the assistance of any religion. In the mark of Judeo-Christianity, in the 1st century, is already started the application of the method, and emerges in the Middle East, multitude of ascetics and saints, who retire to the deserts and mountains to live in solitude. During the 2 and 3 centuries, grows so much the population of anchorites, that many decided to join under the command of a superior saint, and the order of some rule, are constituted then the communities of Cenobites. Nevertheless, the community of the Cenobites didn't reach yet the union grade required for the monastic way of life, due to, every member continued with the eremite life and are only gathered to pray and feed. And with the anchorites and Cenobites, roam everywhere the wandering friars, occidental version of the oriental mendicant monks. In the 5th century, the colonies of anchorites and Cenobites counted thousands and thousands of members in Egypt, Palestine, and Middle East. In just one diocese of Egypt, Xerxes, lived 20,000 of female eremites, and 100 anchorite hermits, while in life of St. Pachomius, existed 7,000 Cenobite monks, in their monasteries, that reaches to 50,000 in the V century. With this I want to exemplify, Dr. Setonal, the magnitude of the pre-monastic, an already new movement was the one of Far East inspiration. In the propitious moment, to institute the Occidental monasticism, and to diffuse the deceit that had consisted in an original Judeo-Christian creation, would be presented, after the death of the Empire Theodosius, in 395, when the Roman Empire is distributed among his 2 sons Arcadius and Honorius. Arcadius establishes in Constantinople, given birth to Byzantine Empire, which would last until the year 476. The Empire of Occident is divided in multiple Roman Germanic kingdoms, and begins a collective process of isolation and cultural decadence. Not only with Asia were broken the cultural connections, but with the same Greece. But, the European society was already prepared for the monastic institution. For centuries, had seen passing the wandering friars coming from the Holy Land, and listening the histories of the Oriental anchorites and Cenobites. Even many pilgrims traveled to the Holy Land, and there adopted the ascetic life, preserving at their return the acquired habits. In that moment, 6th century, not exist European mountainous zone not inhabited by Christian eremites. But once established the order of the monasteries, all would forget the Oriental origin of the monastic institution. Precisely, from the Benedictine monasteries, will emerge the copies and translations of the most fecund books of the Greek culture, which didn't have a monastic institution, and will be lost, every vestige of the cultures of Far East. Vestiges that had existed in the Roman Empire, and that mysteriously disappearance from Europe at the same time that appear the most adequate books to push Occident to the spiritual disaster of the Renaissance and the modern age, that's to say, the books where are exposed the rationalism and the Greek speculation, root of the philosophy, and the modern science. nothing will be told, since the Benedictine culture, about the Atlantean origin of the European civilizations, neither about the religions of the populations of Asia, nor about the recent Germans, who will be obeyed to forget their gods, and beliefs, and their runic alphabets. And nothing will be told, of course, that can relate the Occidental monastic institution with other cultures, that can awake the suspicion that what occurred in Europe is a history repeated in other parts, the conclusion of a method of psychosocial strategy to exert the control of the human societies. Recently, after the 9th century, by the presence of the Arabs in Spain, and in the 12th century, by the transculturation produced by the Crusades, some alert spirits warn the deceit. But they are few and will be too late to stop the Gellams. Saint Benedict, who was born in the year 480, founded in 530, the model of Monte Cassino, and redacted in 534, his famous law. That he received the instruction of the angels of the White Fraternity, there are no doubts, because his Regla Monicorum is a faithful reproduction of the Regla Magistri Sapientiae. When he died in 547, and ascended to heaven through a path guarded by the angels, according to what witnessed many monks, the bases of the Occidental monasticism were settled down. That was the moment, largely awaited by the Gellams, to bounce into the continental countries of Europe. In the 5th century, the Gellams were predominantly concentrated in Ireland, and they started to infiltrate in the Catholic Church. One of them was St. Patrick, who was sent to the continent to study the Christian doctrine, and to make contact with members of the White Fraternity. He returns in 432, coming from Rome, invested of bishop and with the papal authorization to evangelize Ireland. Immediately founded many monasteries, some of them really important as the ones of Armagh and Bangor, where would be celebrated the synods, and would exist religious schools, where the Gellams of Ireland and Great Britain would hurry to enter. The next 130 years, since the death of St. Patrick, in 462, until the departure of St. Columbanus, in the year 590, are employed by the Gellams to give form to the Church of Ireland, that is to say, to organize its future continental settlement. The year 590 signalizes the historic moment in which the plans of the White Fraternity for the participation of the Gellams begins to be rigorously executed. The place where the Gellams will develop the College of Temples constructors is ready, are the monasteries of the Order of Saint Benedict. And the Benedictine monk Gregory has been chosen Pope, who years before in Constantinople received the Order of the White Fraternity, to convoke the Irish monks, that is to say, the Gellams, to integrate them in the Order of Saint Benedict. It must be remembered that, in the year 589, was developed the Three Council of Toledo, where the king Richard, by the influence of the Bishop of Seville Saint Leander, declares himself Catholic Roman, with the Queen, and all the court of the Visigothic kingdom. Therefore, must not surprise that the Gellams were precipitated to Spain, since that disastrous year 590. However, such apparition caused great shock to the Counts of Tuxvelta, who didn't expect to see the Gellams again in the peninsula, at least while the Goth occupation took place. But such improvidence had its cause in the supposition that the Gellams would remain pagan and would not submit to the Catholic Church. Such supposition was ingenuous, as the reality was in charge to demonstrate it prompt, because the Gellams aspired to control the Catholic Church after their submission to it. The Counts of Tuxvelta, who also belonged to the Church and were Hispanic Gothic nobles, employed then all their influence to prevent the Benedictine expansion in the south of Spain, objective that they totally achieved. The Gellams, as is logic, would be established in the north of Spain, in the Celtic regions. From the Domia Monastery, neighbor to Braga, in the Lusitania, and others in Bidso and in the end of the Canterbury Asturian mountain range, denominated peaks of Europe, the Gellams would undertake countless incursions in the Beatica, with the finality to destroy the house of Tharsis, and steal the wise sword. A total secret war was fought since the 8th century, where the Gellams missionary monks tried to approach to the village of Tuds, and the lords of Tharsis executed them without mercy. But, for each Benedictine Gleam that disappeared leaving no trail, or appeared murdered in a rope by unknown hands, concurred two to replace him, obeying the House of Tharsis, to maintain, as before, a permanent alert state. Experts in black magic, and masters in every type of science, would employ all what they knew to localize the secret cave, but would always fail. At the end, they would ask for help to Beret and Bishar, as will be seen later. It is evident that the insertion of the Gellams in the Catholic Church not constitutes a motive enough to disqualify it completely. The reason is that the Gellams were introduced as a secret society inside of the church, and, even if their intrigues compromised in more than one occasion the whole church, their plans were never declared openly, nor officially assumed by them. On the contrary, in many other opportunities really spiritual personalities, authentic Christians, have shone inside it. It is convenient to consider then, even though such distinction would not be always easy to determine, as though two churches exist superimposed. One, against which the lords of Tharsis fought, is the Gleam Church. I will denominate as this in other parts, and its definition will be emerging from the history. Other is the Church of Christus, or just Church, where the lords of Tharsis belonged, and the Circulus Demonicanis, and where many of those who are for the spirit and against the potencies of the matter belong, for Christus light, and against Jehovah Satan. One is the church of the betrayal to the spirit of men, and the other is the church of the liberation of the spirit of men. One is the church of the demon, of the immortal animal soul, and the other is the church of the God, of the eternal spirit.